It always begins with a voice. Not the kind that entertains, not the kind that merely passes time, but a voice that feels as though it has slipped inside your head without permission. Low, deliberate, weighted with certainty. It doesn't hurry, it doesn't rush. It waits for you to lean closer, to listen harder. At first you mistake it for comfort, a gentle storyteller in the night. But the longer you listen, the more it feels like confession. Not yours. Or perhaps both. The thumbnails glow with promises, real stories, hidden truths, uncovered secrets. A man arrested under strange circumstances. A spy unmasked by accident. A desert survival too miraculous to be believed. You click one, expecting entertainment. Instead, you hear scripture disguised as narrative, command disguised as wisdom. And the strangest part? You don't recall when you stopped questioning it. Viewers describe the sensation the same way. The voice comforts you with repetition, lulls you into familiarity. Then it pierces you with sudden violence. A betrayal, a death, a shock that rattles your chest. And then it soothes again. A cycle, a ritual. Like waves carving grooves into stone, the stories carve something into you. It feels moral, even righteous, yet every lesson is stained with unease. Why does guidance feel like surveillance? Why does wisdom feel like it's watching? The structure is precise, almost mechanical. A mystery is placed before you. A shadow grows larger, step by step. You are promised escalation, revelation, resolution. But just as your pulse rises, the final answer slips away, withheld, deferred, denied. You are left with the echo of dread and the need to click next. This isn't storytelling. It is calibration. A voice measuring your patience, your fear, your hunger for truth. The cadence is familiar, yet corrupted. It echoes the tone of conspiracy explainers, where secrets are peeled back one at a time and paranoia builds like static. But here the lines blur. Morality twists with surveillance, allegory with warning. The story is never only about characters with names you can't confirm. The story is about you. Your sleeplessness. Your doubt. The hollow in your chest when no one else is awake. And the most unsettling detail? The lack of evidence. These tales insist they are real, yet no document, no archive, no witness appears to hold them. You search and find nothing. You trace the trail and it collapses under your feet. Every claim leads to a dead link, every timeline dissolves. Yet instead of rejecting the story, you lean in further. Because the absence of proof feels heavier than proof itself. It whispers, maybe the erasure was deliberate. Maybe you were never meant to find it. So you return. Again and again. To listen. To be told. To be guided. The voice becomes more than narration. It becomes ritual. It becomes mirror. It becomes the presence in the room when the room is otherwise empty. Until, finally, you hear it, not the story, but the silence between sentences. The silence that seems to know you. The silence that seems to breathe when you do. What if the story is not a story at all? What if it is an observation? What if the voice is not recounting the lives of others, but rehearsing the details of yours? Each allegory disguised, each parable encoded, each twist reflecting something you have hidden, something you have lost, something you fear. And as the video ends, and the thumbnails of the next real story glow before you, the suspicion takes root. You were never the audience. You were always the subject. The wisdom wasn't delivered to you. It was extracted from you. The story does not finish. It waits. Watching. They arrive with a rhythm too perfect to be human. Video after video, stitched together like products on an assembly line. The same cadence, the same recycled shadows, the same invisible hand pressing upload at clockwork intervals. Behind the curtain there is no testimony, no trembling witness bearing their soul, only templates. Accusation, betrayal, shock, redemption withheld until the final line. Fin. Until the cycle itself feels older than memory. Look closer and you see the repetition disguised as variety. The same faces, blurred into new names. The same archetypes rotated like masks. The unfaithful lover, the greedy thief, the righteous judge, the helpless child. Each role swapped, recycled, reframed, not lived but engineered. Stocks still stand in for reality, AI breathes artificial breath into narration, yet the effect is strangely hypnotic. The viewer stops questioning if the story is real and begins to accept that the rhythm itself is what matters. The thumbnails betray the strategy. Police uniforms, orange jumpsuits, gold spilling from vaults, women caught in grief, spies caught in shadows. Visual triggers aimed at the limbic brain, primal symbols of fear, desire, loss, authority. Each one a lure, not for the mind but for the nervous system. It bypasses logic and plunges straight into instinct. You don't click because you believe. You click because you can't not. And yet, beneath the production line sheen, something ancient hums. The cadence is modern, but the architecture feels as old as folklore, as old as fireside warnings whispered in the dark. Betrayal, punishment, exile, revelation. The very patterns of myth now reproduced at industrial scale. But myths once grew from lived memory, shared scars. These are manufactured, morality printed and bound like counterfeit scripture. The suspicion deepens. This isn't oral tradition preserved. This is conditioning disguised as wisdom. A factory of parables, designed not to enlighten but to mold, to bend, to train. Each upload is another drop in the ritual, another thread in the net. And still, the viewers return. Night after night, unable to resist the rhythm. Because even if the stories are false, the pull feels true. The hypnosis doesn't rely on truth. It relies on repetition. And repetition at scale becomes belief. The factory hums. The uploads never stop. And in the silence between videos, you begin to wonder, are these stories teaching lessons, or are they teaching obedience? They insist these tales are drawn from hidden reports, sealed files, real witnesses whose words were too dangerous to surface in daylight. But the moment you press against that promise, the scaffolding crumbles. Sources evaporate like breath on glass. What you're left with is not truth, but the shape of truth, an outline carefully carved from absence. Arrest records that never existed. Trials with no transcripts. Survivors whose names vanish the moment you search. Each claim points to a door, but every door opens into mist. The language is deliberate. Sources revealed. Records uncovered. Classified files obtained. Each phrase heavy with the authority of government leaks, each one echoing the cadence of FOIA documents and intelligence briefings. Yet when you follow the trail, it leads to silence. No documents surface. No archives verify. Instead, you find dead links, expired domains, pages scrubbed from memory as if they were never there. The performance of credibility becomes its own ritual, not evidence, but the mimicry of evidence. Timelines bend under scrutiny. Events are referenced with missing years, blurred dates, collapsed geographies. A man said to be arrested in 2012 appears again, under a different name, in a case supposedly from 2019. Miraculous escape in one story mirrors another told months later, the details reshuffled, the names altered. What begins as folklore begins to look like a recycling plant of lies. Yet the more contradictions you find, the more haunted you become. Because the erasure itself feels intentional. And so you keep digging deeper and deeper. You chase vanished pages through archive snapshots. You scroll threads of speculation that end in sudden deletion. You find ghost citations, books that never existed, articles that lead to empty shells. Proof remains just beyond your fingertips, like a shape underwater. And the longer you reach, the more you begin to realize, the absence isn't an accident. The absence is the point. This is the trap. By stripping away verifiable anchors, the storytellers leave you stranded in contradiction. You become the investigator, scribbling notes, cross-referencing timelines, hungry to stitch together a pattern. But in doing so, you become the prisoner. The maze expands with every attempt at verification. You refresh. You retry. You reload the next video, convinced that maybe this one will hold the missing piece. It never does. Instead, it leaves you with the echo of what isn't there. The ghost of documentation. The silence of erased testimony. And in that silence, paranoia thrives. Was the story fabricated? Or was the evidence deliberately destroyed, hidden, scrubbed away by forces larger than the storyteller? Either answer poisons the mind. The watchers don't leave. They spiral. Because the void is louder than proof. The vanishing of truth is more disturbing than truth itself. And so the story survives, not in the presence of facts, but in the haunting power of what cannot be found. It feels accidental at first, a late-night recommendation, a thumbnail promising wisdom or warning. But then the pattern reveals itself. The algorithm does not just suggest, it selects. It curates who is invited into the labyrinth and when. Insomniacs, the grieving, the restless. Those most open, most fractured, most willing to listen to a voice that seems to speak directly into their wound. The story arrives like a coincidence, but the timing is surgical. The runtime is never random. 30, 40, 60 minutes. Lengths chosen not for the depth of the story, but for the architecture of profit. Each tale is stretched and padded to the threshold of monetization. Its silences filled with repetition, its climaxes delayed until the exact moment when attention falters. Every 5 to 7 minutes, without fail, a shock is inserted. Betrayal, violence, miracle, revelation. Not because the story demands it, but because the retention curve does. The rhythm of folklore is replaced by the rhythm of analytics. In this space, unverifiable dramas flourish where facts would falter. Stories without sources spread faster, live longer, and yield more return. The algorithm rewards not truth, but the stickiness of fear. It is not reporting, it is engineering. Each video a test, each comment a data point. Which fears travel fastest? Which archetypes seize the heart? Which moral punishments hold the gaze? The stories feel personal, but what they extract is impersonal. Your data, your triggers, your private blueprint of belief. The result is subtle but devastating. The viewer begins to lose the boundary between moral instruction and surveillance. Between confession and programming. The story feels like a warning, yet it shapes behavior. It feels like comfort, yet it sharpens paranoia. It feels like truth, yet it thrives in absence. The voice is no longer telling a tale, it is measuring you. Every pause, every replay, every late-night binge is part of the experiment. And so the suspicion grows. Maybe it isn't the storyteller who holds the power, but the platform itself. A hidden hand, invisible but absolute, deciding which narratives rise and which sink, shaping not the content of belief but the mechanics of believing. Not what we think, but how we are taught to think. The shadow is not in the story. The shadow is in the system that delivers it. It is late, and the room is dark. The screen glows with fragments of other lives, betrayals, rescues, punishments, miracles. Yet as you watch, the unease creeps inward. The voice never recounted events as you might have thought. It whispered your own patterns back at you, encoding your fears, your regrets, your restless routines into allegory. Every moral lesson is a mirror, reflecting not what is true in the story, but what is true in you. Guilt curls around your chest. Obsession lingers in your gaze. The need for justice, for order, for clarity, it tightens its grip. The narratives exploit the spaces between your thoughts, inserting themselves where doubt and fatigue have softened your defenses. Every sleepless hour, every click, every half-heard whisper of a claim, it all becomes part of the rhythm, part of the design. The insomnia is not incidental. It is the mechanism through which suggestion takes root, the conduit for belief to flourish unchecked. And then the twists arrive, precise, calibrated. A betrayal, a miraculous escape, a moral judgment pronounced and deferred. Each shock is more than plot, each moment is a test. The story measures your reactions, maps your engagement, traces the boundaries of your attention. The realization is subtle at first, then undeniable. You are no longer merely watching. You are being watched, your state cataloged, your curiosity harvested. The story is not a lesson. It is a vector. The supposed wisdom of the parables, the morals, the truths, the guidance, begins to unravel. Perhaps it is not ancient. Perhaps it is not moral. Perhaps it is an experiment. not in storytelling, but in attention, in faith, in the capacity of a human mind to be bent, guided, and monitored through narrative alone. Every sigh, every shiver, every pause in the voice is part of a network of observation that stretches further than you imagined. And when the video ends, there is no closure. The echoes persist. You feel them in the quiet, in the corners of your vision, in the way your thoughts hesitate before certainty. You understand, finally, that the story was never just about others. It has always been about you, your fears, your rituals, your loneliness. And that lingering, impossible question, static and insistent, hums at the edges of your mind. If the story knows me this well, what else does it already know? You do not look away. You cannot.